My name is Travis O'Million, and the purpose of this webinar is to introduce some of the information that can be found within Assessment for Reading Instruction by Michael C. McKenna and Catherine A. Doherty-Stahl. Now, as you can tell by the title, much of the information within this text focuses on reading assessment. Now, taking it a step further, the authors also offer many great ideas of how to address the needs of struggling readers in certain aspects of reading assessment. Now, it's important to begin our discussion by noting that all reading assessment is based on a model. There are 4 different models presented here, starting with the deficit model, where teachers are viewed as a physician, and the purpose of their assessment is to prescribe a specific intervention. The second model would be the contextual model, where a student is assessed based on their interaction between the student, the methods, and materials being used. So, for instance, if there was a text being read, the student would be assessed on the text. The third assessment model would be the stage model, to see exactly where readers are within the several different stages of reader development. And the final model would be the cognitive model, where basically there's an assessment for word recognition, comprehension of language and text, and ability to utilize strategies while they are reading. Now, when we look at assessments, there's several different concepts that we can cover. First, starting with the way in which assessments are administered. They can be administered in a group fashion or individually. Groups are usually done simultaneously and can be a little bit more efficient. However, with an individual assessment, there's more room for teacher adaptation and also a little bit more engagement towards the individual. Now, assessments can either be formal or informal. Formal testing, such as state testing, it usually leaves little room for teacher adaptation and is often scored, as you can see, in a prescribed manner. Now, informal testing leaves a little bit more room for the teacher to change things, score a different way, or utilize different parts of the assessment. The manner in which you look at the results of an assessment depends on whether it's a norm-referenced assessment or a criterion-referenced assessment. A norm reference would take the results and compare them with other learners within that age group to check the developmental level and compare where the student is performing. A criterion-referenced assessment, on the other hand, simply looks at a benchmark and in comparison with where the student scored. Now, an example of a criterion-referenced assessment would be a driver's test. Reading assessment could also be characterized as either being screening or diagnostic testing. Screening provides a broad estimate of where each student is performing. Screening is utilized within RTI models all the time. Diagnostic testing, on the other hand, provides clear results as far as where students are struggling, and these results will also often be used to plan for instruction. It's also important to note that not all assessment are tests. Written work, observations, parental input, and portfolio assessments are also considered valuable tools in reading assessment. McKenna and Stahl point out that it is very important to assess early readers in terms of concepts of print. Now, the things that you want to look for is whether the child knows how a book is held and opened, where a text would begin, the direction that they would actually read words in, and boundaries between words, what the actual white spaces between words form. Another area that you want to check is whether they have down some concept of story. And one way of doing so is by conducting a picture walk. Now on the screen you see an example of a picture walk guideline. This would be conducted by the teacher while a student is working with a book. It begins with book handling skills, engagement, comments made about pictures, storytelling comments, and comprehension strategies that are actually taking place while the student is walking through the text. There is a scale based on how the student performs between 0 and 2 within these guidelines. When assessing emergent literacy, you're also looking for alphabetic recognition to check to see that the learner knows the difference between each letter, whether it be capital or lowercase. And as you can see, it would be common to use an alphabet recognition chart to do so. Phonemic awareness is another area of emergent literacy that should be assessed within young readers. Most of these assessments should be done in one sitting and can be in a game-like fashion just to check that students are picking up individual sounds of letters. Another area of reading assessment is word recognition. Within word recognition, readers are assessed on their ability to recognize sight words, structural analysis, and phonics. As readers begin and continue to build their sight word inventory, it is important for educators to continuously check and assess to see how students are performing in terms of sight words. Typically, educators will often select words off of either the Dolch list or the Fry list and have them read through to see how students are performing. Now, if a student takes longer than 1 second, that means that they are decoding the word usually, and it cannot be counted as a sight word. In terms of word recognition, another area to assess readers is their ability to determine word meaning based on prefixes and suffixes. Now, in doing so, an educator may ask students to determine what a specific word means based on its usage within a sentence or its context. Now, when doing so in a real fashion, you may use a word such as uncomfortable. However, when you're utilizing a coined term, such as dogless in the question, you're checking to see if students have knowledge based on what a suffix would mean. In this case, less, meaning less, the student would have to determine, based on the sentence, that it means without. Phonics is another area of word recognition in which readers may be assessed on. Informal phonics inventories are often taken by educators to see exactly where readers are struggling or succeeding in terms of phonemic sounds. Now, as you can see by the list, there are many different areas in which they may be assessed on. Now, phonics inventory, such as the one shown on the screen, is a rather convenient way to monitor skill acquisition in terms of phonics. When conducting an informal inventory such as this, you would have the reader pronounce each phonemic sound and mark their progress. Fluency is the once neglected goal of reading as referred to by McKenna and Stahl. The components of fluency consist of accuracy, automatic recognition, and prosody or inflection while reading. All three of these components may be assessed by conducting a running record, which you will be doing on your own after this webinar. A reader's word accuracy can be found in form of a percentage by simply finding the number of correct words read out of 100. After determining the percentage of word accuracy, it is easier to determine whether or not a text is on a student's independent, instructional, or frustration level. A scale similar to the Betts criteria, which was designed by Emmett Betts in the 1930s, is used loosely by many reading inventory programs. This scale determines that if a student is 99 to 100% accurate in word recognition, they are on the independent reading level. 95 to 98% would register them within the instructional level. And 90% or lower would recognize that as a frustrating level for the student. To find a reader's words per minute score, you will have to use a timer to see how many words the reader can read correctly in 30 seconds and then multiply that by 2. Or for a more accurate scale, you can have the reader read for 60 seconds and count the number of correct words. Within assessing fluency, accuracy and automatic recognition are a little bit easier to judge based on simple determination between words correct and words per minute. Prosody is an area that takes a little bit more teacher discretion to determine. However, rubrics and scales, such as the one seen on the screen, will often help educators judge where a reader would fall within their fluency. This scale in particular focuses on expression and volume, phrasing, smoothness, and pace. Now, you will become more familiar with this scale once you perform the activity following the webinar. A person's overall reason for reading in the first place is comprehension, or understanding exactly what they read. Reasons for assessing comprehension can be to gauge a degree of how much a student comprehends a selection, chapter tests and post-reading assessments, or also to estimate the general level of proficiency that a reader is at, or their reading level. Questioning is often a convenient means of assessing reading comprehension. The questions delivered may come in the form of literal questions, inferential questions, or critical questions. Literal questions call on a reader to recall specific information from a text. Inferential questions call on them to draw conclusions or make inferences and read between the lines. Critical questions call on a reader to make a judgment regarding what they read. Despite the convenience of using questioning to assess reading comprehension, there may be issues involving reading dependency and the readability of actual questions. Reading dependency refers to whether or not the student would actually have to read the text to answer the question. Readability refers to whether they can actually understand the question itself. To avoid these issues, educators may want to utilize an alternative approach to assess reading comprehension. Such approaches include closed assessment, maze activities, oral retelling, written responses, student-generated questions, performance tasks, and discussions. As readers become proficient, it is important to continue assessment. Some assessment that may occur may be in the area of strategic knowledge assessment. This is an assessment of metacognition, or the way in which a student realizes what strategies they are using while they are reading. Interviews and inventories, such as the one featured on the screen, as well as activities such as double entry journals, are effective ways of assessing strategic knowledge assessment within proficient readers. While this webinar has focused on a brunt of the information presented by McKenna and Stahl within Assessment for Reading Instruction, I would still like to recommend this text to anybody out there that is in the field of education, as it provides a great deal of information regarding intervention for students that are struggling